In a world where even footsteps can feel lost, a traveler meets a teacher who reveals that the path to purpose is not marked by the roads we take, but by the love we carry, leading him and those who follow on a journey that will change their hearts forever. The sun was setting softly over the green hills, casting a golden glow across the landscape as Jesus and his disciples stopped for rest. The day had been long, and the coolness of evening began to settle into the earth. They gathered near a weathered oak tree, its branches stretching wide, offering shade and a sense of peace. The air smelled of damp earth and wildflowers, and the faint hum of insects created a quiet symphony around them. Each disciple took a seat on the ground, unrolling packs and sharing bread, figs, and olives. Their faces showed the fatigue of the journey, but there was a quiet joy in their shared company. As they ate, they began talking among themselves, voices soft and thoughtful. Peter, his eyes reflecting a curiosity as sharp as his wit, asked about their purpose and destination. "Master," he began, glancing toward Jesus with a look of both admiration and wonder, "we follow you each day, but I sometimes wonder, to what end? What are we meant to find?" Beside him, John listened intently, his heart open and compassionate, while Thomas, ever the skeptic, remained silent, his gaze distant. It was then that they noticed the figure of a man in the distance, moving slowly and seemingly without direction along the road. The man, clothed in a worn robe, was moving without purpose, his footsteps heavy with an invisible burden. He paused frequently, turning his head as if he expected to see something familiar, only to lower it again in disappointment. The disciples watched, their curiosity piqued. "Who is he?" John whispered, his voice laced with concern. Jesus' gaze softened, a knowing look in his eyes as he observed the traveler. "Sometimes a man's steps reveal his heart more than his words. Let us invite him to rest," he said, a gentle smile playing on his lips. The disciples exchanged glances but trusted in their teacher's wisdom, eager to see what lesson might unfold. As the stranger drew closer, his features became clearer, etched with lines of sorrow and fatigue. His name was Eliezer, a man who had once known the joys of family and home but had since lost everything dear to him. Years before, his wife and child had succumbed to a sudden illness, leaving him alone in a house that no longer felt like home. Unable to bear the emptiness, he had left, wandering from village to village, hoping to outrun the ache in his heart. His eyes, once bright with love and laughter, were now dull, the spark long extinguished by grief. Every town, every road, seemed to promise some relief, but he never found it. Inside, Eliezer wrestled with questions that had haunted him for years. "What am I seeking?" he often asked himself, knowing deep down that he had no answer. He had tried to settle in new places, to start anew, but every attempt had felt hollow. The faces of his lost family appeared to him in dreams, their smiles vivid, only to dissolve with the morning light. His soul felt as barren as the dusty roads he walked, and every step seemed heavier than the last. He had come to believe that life held nothing more for him than this endless wandering. To feel such loss, to endure each day with no hope, this was the journey that consumed him. As Eliezer approached, Jesus raised a hand in greeting, his voice warm and inviting. "Friend, come sit with us. Rest for a while." The unexpected kindness caught Eliezer off guard. He had grown accustomed to the indifference of strangers, the quick glances that dismissed him as just another weary soul, moving without aim. But there was something in Jesus' eyes, an understanding, a gentleness, that eased his guarded heart. Slowly, he accepted the invitation, sitting down beside them, his body tense yet yearning for the comfort these strangers seemed to offer. The disciples watched in silence, each of them curious yet patient. Peter offered him a piece of bread, and John poured a cup of water, their gestures simple yet filled with quiet compassion. Eliezer hesitated, unsure if he deserved such kindness, but hunger and weariness overcame his pride, and he accepted their offerings. As he ate, Jesus asked softly, "Where have you come from, friend? And where are you headed?" The question struck Eliezer deeply, touching a wound he thought hidden. He looked at Jesus, his gaze heavy with the weight of years. "I do not know," he replied after a pause, his voice thick with unspoken sorrow. "I have no destination, no purpose. I left my home but I found no peace. I walk and I walk but I am always lost." Encouraged by Jesus' gentle presence, Eliezer began to share his story. His words came slowly, each sentence a burden lifted. He spoke of his wife with eyes like the morning sun, and his young son, whose laughter had filled their home with life. They had been his world, his purpose, and he had worked tirelessly to provide for them, to build a life filled with love and joy. But illness had swept through his village, claiming lives swiftly and mercilessly. He could do nothing but watch as his family faded before his eyes, powerless to stop the tide of fate. He had stayed by their side, holding their hands, whispering promises of better days, but they had slipped away, leaving him in a silence that felt like death itself. The disciples listened, their hearts heavy with empathy. They could see the pain etched in his every word, feel the sorrow that clung to him like a shadow. Peter clenched his fists, unable to hide his anger at such suffering, while John's eyes brimmed with tears, feeling Eliezer's grief as if it were his own. Even Thomas, usually guarded and questioning, found himself moved, understanding in that moment the fragility of human life and the unpredictable nature of fate. As Eliezer's tale unfolded, each disciple felt a part of their own heart open, touched by the universal pain of loss and the desire for meaning in a world that often felt cruel. After a long silence, Jesus spoke, his voice soft yet filled with conviction. "Loss can feel like the end, like a darkness that swallows us whole. But it is not an end. It is a part of the journey, a teacher that, though harsh, reveals the strength within us." He spoke not only to Eliezer but to each disciple, his words touching places in their hearts they had tried to bury. "You loved deeply, Eliezer, and that love still lives within you. It did not die with those you lost. It remains, waiting for you to let it guide you, to give it to others who, like you, are lost and searching." The disciples felt the truth of his words resonate within them. Peter remembered the anger he sometimes felt, a rage that had no direction, and understood now that it was his own fear of loss. John, always compassionate, felt a new depth of empathy, realizing that love was not just for those close to him but for all who suffered. Thomas, ever questioning, found himself moved, sensing that perhaps his doubts were his own form of wandering, his own struggle to find purpose. Each of them, in their own way, felt a shift, a quiet understanding that life's hardships were not meaningless but could become stepping stones toward a greater purpose. As night fell, the group settled by a small river, the moon casting silver reflections on the water's surface. The disciples lay quietly, each lost in thought, processing the day's revelations. Eliezer sat by the riverbank, watching the gentle flow of water, feeling a peace he had not known in years. For the first time since his family's passing, he felt as if he could breathe without pain. The silence of the night was comforting, wrapping him in a stillness that allowed him to look inward. His mind returned to Jesus' words, the idea that his love still lived within him, waiting to be shared, and he felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that perhaps he was not entirely lost. As dawn broke, they continued their journey together. Along the way they encountered various people, a mother and her child seeking food, a beggar asking for shelter, and a merchant struggling with his cart. Eliezer watched in awe as Jesus and the disciples offered help without hesitation, sharing what little they had. For the first time, Eliezer felt his heart stirring, a small yet undeniable desire to do the same. He offered his hand to the merchant, lifting the cart with newfound strength, and in that simple act, he felt a warmth that began to fill the empty places within him. Later that evening, as they rested once more, Jesus and Eliezer walked together. Eliezer confessed his lingering doubts, admitting his fear that he would never feel whole again. Jesus listened, his face filled with compassion, and then spoke of his own experiences of rejection and sorrow, explaining that even he had faced moments of loneliness. But it is in those moments, he said, that we find the strength within us. Suffering can be a teacher, showing us the depth of our hearts and the capacity we have for love and compassion. Eliezer felt a lightness in his heart, a small flame of peace. Eliezer awoke the next morning with a sense of calm. He realized he was ready to walk alone again, though this time he carried a purpose within him. Each disciple offered him words of encouragement, especially John, who had grown close to him. As they said their farewells, Jesus gathered the disciples, sharing a final lesson. Purpose is not found in a single place but in every act of love. Walk with compassion and you will never be lost. With renewed strength, Eliezer walked along a path bathed in morning light. He no longer felt empty, knowing now that his journey had meaning, that each step could be filled with love and kindness. The disciples, watching him go, felt a sense of peace, understanding now that they too were part of a greater journey, one that would guide them all their lives. As the sun rose higher, they walked together, filled with a quiet joy, their hearts light with the knowledge that purpose was found not in a place but in the way they walked, each step a testament to love. This is end of the story. Comment Amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.